separate email, so I hope that everybody who needed to get it got it.
Ah, there we are. Hello.
Hey, Earl, how you doing?
Good.
Yeah, did y'all make it through Delta okay?
Oh, yeah, we're fine.
Good, good, good. Let me see, we got Chuck on the line. Let me see if we have Ross. I don't think we have Ross quite yet. How's it going, Chuck?
Doing well.
Good deal. Thank you for being here. Welcome, Kim, Melissa, Matthew, Ben, Devin. Let me see. Hey, John, Rob, Leah, thank y'all for being here today. Ryan, Maya Landry, thank you for showing up and being with us today. We really appreciate it. Let me see. I see Mia on the call too, Benita, Will, Bridget, welcome, welcome. Yeah, and if the chat pod, in the chat pod, you could go ahead and put your name and what organization you're with. That would be really helpful. Thank you, Mike and Devin, for getting us started on that. Okay, I'm going to check my messages and make sure that I haven't missed. Okay, sorry, apologies, y'all. I'm still here. I'm just trying to troubleshoot.
Hey, Rachel, Major.
Hey, Major, how you doing?
Good. You don't see me?
Let me see, let me see. Trying to look for your video in here. There's quite a few people, which is great.
I'm not on video. I'm on phone.
Oh, okay. Yep, I see you in the chat.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for being here, Major. Okay, y'all. Was just trying to get some information to our chair so that he could enter into the conversation. I think we should probably be good to go. So we do have a fully packed agenda today, as always. And really, truly, we can't thank y'all enough for being here and joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me see. I got to get this little taskbar out of the way. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we might already be recording the meeting. We do have quite a few people who come together to make this work happen. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Sanderson. I work for Capital Region Planning Commission and the Region 7 Watershed Coordinator. We have several people who have been working behind the scenes and are going to be helping with facilitation today. So we have Kim Marosek, who's also a Capital Region Planning Commission. She's the Director of Planning. Evelyn Campo, who's with the Office of Community Development at the state level. There's Ross, our chair. Great. She's also going to be helping with some facilitation as well as leading us through a survey towards the end of our discussion today. And we also have Dr. Thomas Dowsett with LSU, who's here to provide that support as well. Some other roles that are to be mentioned as well are we have Risa Mueller, who is on the call today. She's going to be, providing quite a bit of technical support. She works a lot of magic in the background to make stuff happen. And then I see we have Alex Carter, who's with OCD, Nicolette Jones with OCD, Helen Waller with OCD as well. Let me see if I'm missing anybody from OCD. I'm trying to run through the list. We got Pat Forbes on the line. Hello, Pat. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad to have y'all. So I wanted to, before we got started today, and just as a reminder, if you could please in the chat box, put your name, your organizational affiliation, and then if you'd like, I would like to kind of hear if this quote strikes you in any type of a way. So just your thoughts on it. So leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. It's a quote by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. So if you just have any initial reactions to that, in particular, I like this quote because I really think about our watershed challenges, and this work is, we have a lot of shared challenges, right? But that also means that we have shared opportunities. So today, as a reminder, this is a public meeting, and I'm going to start my timer, y'all. Promise I'm not just texting away. So it is a public meeting. We are recording it. We will have meeting minutes that are shared after the meeting is over. You can find any of that information from previous meetings online at crpcla.org under the Region 7 drop-down tab under previous events. We'll do roll call in just a second, but if possible, please use your video camera during the meeting if possible. And if you have any technical difficulties, please place a message in the chat pod. So our objectives for today, before we do roll call, we are going to do a recap from the September 23rd meeting just to make sure everybody's caught up to speed. We're going to focus on really trying to get through any last minute edits that we have to the guiding principles framework document that came out of the Values, Vision, Goals workshop that has been through a public comment period. We did receive some comments, so we just want to go over that one more time before we set that document to the side for just a little bit. We're going to go through governance systems and ecosystems and kind of the similarities between those two. So it's a concept that we want to ground in. And then we're going to go through organizations and scales of decision making. So as a reminder for people on the call today, the goals of the Regional Steering Committee, and anytime you see RSC, that will be in reference to the Regional Steering Committee. Our goals are to develop a long-term governance structure that is due at the end of January. That's what the majority of our conversations have been focusing on. We also have a project inventory that's due October 31st. This is a reminder. If you need more information, send me an email at rsanderson@crpcla.org. And then we also will be identifying projects to recommend for funding, and that's due June of 2021. But we're not going to start that process until spring of 2021. So we are kind of, eating the elephant one bite at a time, if you will. So in two roles that are always important to mention are our chair and our vice chair. So Ross Lehner and Chuck Berger, I know that they have a couple of words to say, and I just wanted to say thank you to them. And then thank you also to everybody for being a part of this conversation today. We tried to put some humor in here. We've had a lot of challenges this year, but we've also had a lot of opportunities. So Ross and Chuck, do you have any words that you would like to say? You can come off mute.
Yeah, I'll just say thanks for everybody being here and attending and, being focused and, getting through this. But every time we get together, it seems like we're talking about a hurricane that was coming or one that's coming or one that just passed. And of course, Hurricane Delta just passed. Just been a crazy season. So again, just help out your neighbors where you can and appreciate everybody's work on this steering committee. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Ross said and thank everybody for being here and preparing and reviewing this material, especially when hurricanes were bearing down upon us.
Yeah, thank y'all. Chuck and Ross have both been rocks throughout this process. They've been very grounding. So we thank them for all of their work within this, as well as the rest of our regional steering committee members. So we are going to go ahead and go through a roll call, essentially, just to make sure that folks are here. So we'll just call out the name and then make sure that we got you on the line for our regional steering committee members. So do we have Mike Enlow and or Ron Savoy with Ascension Parish?
Mike is on the line.
Thanks, Risa. Do we have Tom Stevens and or Fred Rayford with East Baton Rouge Parish?
I'm here, Fred.
Hey, Fred. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have James? Thank you. Do we have James Stewart and or Joni Stewart with East Feliciana? All right. What about John Clark with Everville? I think I saw your name in the chat.
He did log in, yes.
Thank you, Risa.
Here too.
John
I'm
Clark.
sorry, I missed the. Hey, John. Thanks for joining us. Was there somebody else that was just speaking that I missed? I'm sorry.
Tom Stevens. Can you hear me?
Tom Stevens, there we go. Yes.
Okay, I'm here.
Thank
I had a
you.
little
Sorry.
trouble with
It was-
my-
Perfect. We're glad to have you, Tom. Let me see. I think we do have Earl on the line. You spoke up earlier. Thank you for being with us, Earl.
I'm here and good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We got Major on the line too, right?
Yes, Major here, but I think you skipped Livingston Parish. I'm not sure. I didn't hear anybody.
No, I did. You're right. Thank you. Apologies. Mark Harrell and or Steve Kistler? Okay. Not hearing anything. We will be on the lookout to see if they join us soon. Do we have Ryan Donahue or Ryan LaRousse, for St. James?
Yes, ma'am. Donahue's on the line.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Yes, ma'am.
What about Devin Foyle or Renee Pasterek with St. John?
Good afternoon, this is Devin.
Hey, Devin. And then we got Ross Liner. We've already heard from you. Thank you for being here. And then I think I saw Bridget's name. Do we have you on the line, Bridget?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me, Rachel?
Loud and clear. Thank you. What about Bobby Joe Breland and or Alex Summerall with Washington? Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so we'll be on the lookout. What about Gary Migo and or Emily Cobb with West Feliciana?
Gary's here.
Hey, Gary, thanks for joining.
Hey, all right.
Let me see, do we have Dietmar and or Larry Bankston with Amite River Basin Commission?
I think so. I hope so.
Gotcha loud and clear, Dietmar.
All right.
Thanks for being here today.
Hey, Rachel.
Let me
it's
see.
Alex.
I think.
I'm on.
Hey, Alex.
Hi.
Let me see. I think I saw Karen Zito on the line. Do we have Karen?
Yes.
Thanks for joining us today, Karen.
Thank you.
We heard from Chuck, so we know we got Chuck on the line. What about Ronnie Carter and or Kim Coates for not Lake? Ronnie Carter is with Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, which is actually now Pontchartrain Conservancy, and Kim Coates is actually a council member with Tangipahoa Parish. So do we have one or both of y'all on the line?
Ronnie's here.
I'm here.
Hey, Ronnie.
Hey, Kim.
Hey, Kim.
Hey.
Okay. Well, thank y'all for hanging in there with us for the long list of introductions. We are very fortunate to be able to have one of the largest regions, which means that we have one of the largest regional steering committees. If you haven't already, please place your name as well as organizational affiliation in the chat box. So our agenda for today, we're going to do a recap from the September 23rd meeting. We're going to go through the guiding principles framework with the steering committee. We're going to talk about governance systems and ecosystems. We're going to go through organizations and scales of decision making. And then we'll do a public comment period and close out as usual. So I know a lot of these headings seem very vague, but I promise we're going to get into more detail as soon as we get into the discussion. We'll go ahead and start with a recap from the September 23rd meeting and from some material from before September 23rd as well, just so that we're hitting back on the process that we're going through. So as a reminder, we do have these 4 R's, and the credit for this is to Dr. Thomas Dowsett. The 4 R's are rules, resources, relationships, and reporting. And these are really concepts that we're grounding back into as we really think about what the build out of the long-term governance structure for Region 7 of the Watershed Initiative looks like. So what you see highlighted in yellow are things that we're going to focus on today. What you see in black, in the black box, is what we would like to get to today if we have the time. I think we'll probably have, I don't know that we're going to have time to get to the relationships aspect, but if we don't have time to get to it today, that's going to be the main focus of the discussion for our meeting on October 29th. So today we're going to think about, what are really the roles that this coalition should fill? So Region 7, what is the current context of this watershed, and what are really the geographical and interest group considerations that we have to think about as well? And as a reminder, there is a process by which we are building out our governance structure. So for today, we're going to focus on really the roles and the relationships. For if we get to the relationships part, I have a feeling that the roles discussion is going to be very robust. For October 29th, we'll build out the relationships and resources part of that governance structure, so those questions that are associated with those two buckets, if you will. In November, we're going to continue on that path, so continue to build out that governance recommendation and the governance structure, the provisional governance structure. I want to be very explicit about that. So really the resources and reporting aspects of that. And then by December, we should be moving into discussing a couple of different options with the Regional Steering Committee as well. By January, it is our goal that we would be able to vote on a provisional recommendation for Region 7 for governance. Evelyn, do you want to walk us through what the few months after that look like, after we have that provisional governance recommendation?
Sorry, I had to unmute 2 times. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
So much. So I know we've said this a lot. I'm sure everyone is saying, oh, I'm very familiar with this, but just in case you're not, I just want to make sure to repeat that this is an iterative planning process. And, we're in the process now of discussing how to move forward. And sometimes there is a need to, revisit during those deliberations and explain, the findings of this group to the larger communities that you're associated with. And so that is what this timeline explains, right? That right now we're in this kind of initial phase, November through January, coming up to where you would make a provisional recommendation. After that point, there's sort of an outreach and engagement period where you further vet that concept with the communities and make sure that you get feedback that maybe you haven't had yet in some of these meetings. And then you have an opportunity to come back to the table and say, okay, let's make sure that we've gotten this right. And that's that May through June period.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. And I think that's really important to ground in is we're having rolling discussions. We haven't made any decisions up to this point, and we won't until the end of January. And even then, it's a provisional decision, right? That's just a moment in time when we get to put our pens in pencils and put the papers down and say, okay, now we're going to see what everybody else thinks beyond those who've been involved in these discussions. And so that iterative process is absolutely it. Thank you, Evelyn. So as a reminder, what took place during September 23rd? Oh, go ahead.
Rachel, since we are on the topic of September 23 meeting, and this is a little bit highlighted a little bit, but in the list that you list as stakeholders for Region 7, we are Region 7, I understand, right? We are Region 7?
The members of the Regional Steering Committee are the representatives.
We are Region 7, correct? The
Watershed
Pontchartrain area is Region 7. Okay. I have a question because I didn't notice it until actually yesterday or before yesterday. We have included all of here West Iberville Parish in Region 7, apparently, which then relates into these town cities of Donaldsonville, Plaquemine, Roseland, and so on, is part of the stakeholders for this region. You also include the Evangeline Regional Planning Commission as a stakeholder, and as far as the Regional Planning Commission in the Hammond area, Atchafalaya Basin. Is that correct? Because they have nothing to do. The Mississippi River is the biggest barrier for Region 7, this watershed. So I think we need to really think about this. Is that what we want? They really are on the west side of the Mississippi River. They should be, if these regional commissions are going to be in charge right now of some of this planning and putting all of this together, it's logical that that should be on their side. So it's their responsibility. The unique situation of Iberville and Ascension is that it's east and west of the Mississippi River. But from a watershed point of view, they are completely separate. I believe at least have a discussion at some point in time. It's very basic to me.
Yeah, thanks, Seymour. I was writing down some notes in my notebook, and I think that those notes have also been recorded and captured by our note takers. I think the discussion on stakeholders is not over and it is not ended. And whenever we say the discussion on stakeholders or talking about representation, that's really multiple layers. So it's who is a part of the regional steering committee, who might be able to provide support to the steering committee, who are people who might be interested, who should be aware of the conversations. There's multiple levels. So during our next conversation on October 29th, we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of that. Some of that discussion might happen today as well. So to catch some people up to speed, just in case they missed the meeting on the 23rd, we did have an update on the preliminary plan analyses work that Dr. Dowsett has been leading. So really, he's been doing some work that is looking over all of the parish and municipal level plans, such as hazard mitigation, capital improvement plans, things of that nature. And it's really looking to see what are the social as well as issue networks that exist across those plans. Who are the actors that are mentioned within that? And this is a very high level overview. So if you want more details, please visit crpcla.org. And under the previous events tab, you will see all of the meeting materials related to September 23rd. We also had that discussion on stakeholders. So really saying, here are some entities that are enabled through state statutes that do watershed management work. Here are some that are not, but we think are interested. So we opened up the discussion to ask if there were additions to be made. Our stakeholder list will probably never be complete. So if you have additions to make, please send me a message at rsanderson@crpcla.org. We spent the majority of our time discussing potential solutions and actions. Specifically, what are the actions that are related to an increase in informed decision-making, which is one of the potential solutions that was identified by the steering committee. What does an increase in capacity and capability look like in terms of actions, as well as accountability? So we are going to move into the guiding principles framework. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just 1 second so that I can drop a link to this document in the chat pod, just to make sure that everybody who would like to see it can see it. Here we go. Okay, so if you click on that link, you should be able to pull up the guiding principles framework. As a reminder, that framework is the document that was created after the August 19th Value Vision Goals workshop that we had. So let me go ahead and make this big screen again. There we go. Okay, so we did receive a few public comments. So what you'll see in that document is that there are comments that are in bold, and those are the comments that were added, or you'll see a line through some of them. So somebody had said, I recommend we remove this word. So that's what's reflected within that document. What we're going to do is have a discussion with the regional steering committee members to really think about the final edits and getting consensus on our values, the vision statement, and the goals. It is a living document, so it'll be revisited and changed over time, perhaps once we have that governance structure set up, and that body can actually relook at this and say, okay, now that we're an official body, does this still make sense? And so today, the goal is not necessarily to wordsmith, but I wanted to ask if there were any last minute items that the regional steering committee members in particular thought needed to be changed. If people with that are not a part of the regional steering committee have any questions or comments, you can put those in the chat pod. So in terms of the values section, does anybody from the regional steering committee think that any edits or alterations should be made?
I didn't have any edits. I was good with the edits as they were.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Anybody else? And if we had anything from Ross or Ronnie or Karen, or just going down the list here, y'all. I'm not trying to pick on you. Okay. Let me look at the chat pod just to make sure. Okay, well, we will move on from this because I'm hearing crickets at this point in time, but this does not mean that this is the final conversation about this document. So please know that this will be something that is revisited as well in the future. So the next portion of this is talking about the vision statement. So again, you know, the vision statement is kind of broken into two parts. So there's a statement that says Region 7 envisions a future with less flood risk, healthier natural environments, and resilience practices that are responsive to the needs of our communities and to our evolving environment. And then there's some specifics that describes what that vision looks like in greater detail. Are there any overarching comments or alterations that members of the Regional Steering Committee would like to recommend?
I had one addition.
Sure. What's up, Chuck?
It's the bullet that says starts off with water quality.
Yep.
Adding to the end of that, a second sentence, we understand that flood risk, and in parentheses, hydrology and water quality go together. One does not gain at the expense of the other.
Can you repeat that one more time, Chuck? I'm recording it in real time. We understand that flood risk, in parentheses, hydrology, and
in parentheses after hydrology.
Oops.
And water quality go together. One does not gain at the expense of the other.
Perfect. Oops. Sorry, y'all. Does anybody have any particular thoughts or comments on that addition? You know, it says water quality in our surface water bodies is improved, creating healthier environments. We understand that flood risk, hydrology, and water quality go together. One does not gain at the expense of the other.
Very good statement.
Great. Thanks, Ronnie.
Learn that from you, Ronnie.
I like it.
Thank you. Okay. Are there, I'm going to save this very quickly before I forget. Are there any other additions or edits for the vision statement? Okay. Well, I'm hearing crickets. Y'all know where to find me, and we've said that this is a living document, so we will refer back to it, and we'll also come back to it for edits as needed. So we'll move to goals now, make this full screen again. Are there any final edits or alterations that any of the Regional Steering Committee members would like to address or put in the guiding principles framework? So you do see a couple items in bold here. Go ahead.
I'm good with the items in bold, but is that in any order of priority?
It is not. That's a great question.
Because if it was, I was going to say put upstream, downstream coordination at the top, because that's where it really centers around. And that's probably the biggest overall coordination effort that needs to happen. And then putting the regional planning efforts, maybe
well, what do y'all think? Do you think, oh, sorry, continue.
Putting the regional planning efforts third after the equitable flood risk statement.
What do y'all think about having these be listed in order of priority? Do y'all think that would be something that would be helpful to better convey to other people and as a reminder for us to know kind of where we're heading with the goals?
This Major, I don't think so. I don't think it matters.
Okay. What about going down the list here?
A priority, you know, may not be in order of priority.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts? Okay, so what
I was
go ahead.
just looking at policy, or not the policy and planning, the data collection goals. I was looking at our parish hazard mitigation plan the other day. Expansive soils is like a huge, 100% of our parish is at risk for I guess, whatever hazardous damage from expansive soils. So that has to do with subsidence. And I know those kind of gauges, I know NOAA operates with LSU to help like some kind of gauges called like CORS system, I think like continuous operating reference stations. I think that could be helpful for flood risk to consider relative sea level rise, especially since we are Region 7 with Pontchartrain, with the Pontchartrain estuary there. I think that could be helpful to just keep in mind with our data collection. I'm not, you know, involved in geodesy at all, so I don't know what goes into that, but I think it would be important to keep in mind, especially for partnerships and collaborations.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. So what I'm hearing is that under this use data, we might want to specifically call out being able to also use, you know, I think these other information sources as well, so benchmarks and really subsidence rates and things of that nature. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Hey, this is Earl. We got involved at the core stations a number of years ago. They're really, your surveyors will love you for it if you can get some installed. We worked through USGS and through LSU, and actually were able to get 2 installed in St. Charles Parish. And then along with the ones in Orleans, we were able to get that you know, triple overlay of core stations. You get CRS points for that, by the way. But it makes all the data you collect that much easier and more accurate. So yeah, there's some benefits no matter which way you decide to collect data to doing those core stations.
Yeah, that's really great to know. And also you get CRS points for that. That's everybody's looking for more of those. I get those flood insurance reductions. Does anybody think that we shouldn't include that language in here? That seems like a pretty easy thing to do. Seems like a very simple edit. Okay, I'm not hearing any objections to that. So I think that sounds like a fantastic idea. Use the data where it's available, right? Are there any other edits or suggestions for the goals section? Okay, well, I'm not hearing any. So next steps for this document, y'all. What's going to happen is I'm going to go through, I'm going to make the couple of edits that we had, and then I'll also go ahead and you know, make sure that we're where it's in bold, where we tried to show y'all these are the additional comments that were made between those different iterations of the document. We'll go ahead and unbold those, and then we'll actually post this online and say, hey, this is Currently, our guiding principles framework, we can go into a little bit of the process by which we got there too. So thank y'all. This is a really big step, and this is a big moment in time. Like, now we can tell people, you know, what we're really thinking about for the future, right? This vision statement, we'll keep revisiting this. We envision a future with less flood risk, healthier natural environments, and resilience practices that are responsive to the needs of our communities and to our evolving environment. And this vision statement is very complementary to the mission statement for the Watershed Initiative too. So don't forget that this document is nested under that larger effort. Okay, so we're going to shift gears. You're going to find that we're going to talk about a couple of different buckets of things, but they're all interrelated and interconnected. So we're going to shift into really talking about grounding in kind of a concept where we're discussing and describing how governance systems and ecosystems can be somewhat similar. So what are the principles or behaviors or things that we observe within ecosystems that can be leveraged into successful governance systems as well? So governance systems and ecosystems aren't that different. You know, they are and they're not, right? It seems like a very abstract concept. So governance, with the way that we're thinking about this, and thank you, Dr. Delfit, for providing this language. Governance is understanding that policy happens through channels that go beyond just formal government decision making. Many different players are integrated, right? So there's really this entire network of people who are influencing decisions, people who make the decisions, and those channels that relate and connect them to make that policy actually happen. And there's also an emergent system that comes from a mix of rules, jurisdictional boundaries, stakeholders, and explicit government policies. So the rules are implemented through those jurisdictional boundaries, but it's really the stakeholders that are determining, in many cases, what those rules look like. So governance systems and ecosystems change over time. They adapt as needed. They have networks, and they're created by some pretty symbiotic relationships. So really, whenever we're thinking about, you know, the 50,000-foot view, right, we spend a lot of time talking about, you know, what is the engineering and planning aspects of this work look like? But really, how are we also thinking about the symbiotic relationships that exist with sectors that are maybe not totally within the first sphere of influence, but maybe the second or the third tier sphere, if you will. So thinking about governance and ecosystems, ecosystems are dynamic, they're not static, right? And our governance systems are as well. They don't stay the same, they change as needed over time. So I think with this particular image, what we're getting to is we inhabit places of impermanence. Our environment has changed over eons and will continue to do so. This is obviously a dramatic example, but environments change over time. Ecosystems change over time, and that's based on the conditions that they're subjected to. Our communities also do that. Our communities are dynamic. They're not static. And our governance systems change and adjust based on those things as well. So what you're seeing here is a map that's from LA Safe, which was a project that was undertaken by Office of Community Development. And what this map shows is basically the bigger the circle, the larger the population change. If it's red, that means that population went down. If it's green, that means it increased. And specifically, this map shows population from 2000 to 2010. This is for the 6 LA Safe parishes, so it does not include all of the parishes within Region 7, but it's meant to be an illustrative graphic. So between 2000 to 2010, we had the most active hurricane season to date with 27 named storms, right? So people made a lot of decisions based on those acute as well as chronic stressors. That meant to say, you know, they made a decision or perhaps didn't have the decision and had to relocate or move. The 2010 to 2020 decadal period is going to include, in terms of census data, will include the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, hurricanes, as well as other natural disasters, such as the 2016 flood event. So thinking about each one of those events, people are making decisions over time that are then changing what our communities look like and then are also changing what our governance systems and responses through programs and policies should look like as well. The 2020 to 2030 census period, if you will, those bookends, because census day is April 1st, will include 26 named storms, which is this hurricane season. We've almost beat the 2005 record. And it'll also include a global pandemic. So if we think about those internal and external stressors that really lead people to making decisions like moving, which then influences our land use practices and development decisions, it's really important to think about how we are also adjusting and adapting our governance systems to be responsive to that. And perhaps proactive where we know that things like this happen. And so ecosystems and governance systems, as we've mentioned, adapt over time. So plants find ways to elevate out of rock gardens, and people find ways to elevate out of flood-prone areas. And that means that there's a shift in policy. So maybe perhaps this is a house that was previously not in a special flood hazard area, but now the fronts have been updated and they are. So that means that they're now eligible for a certain program to be able to elevate their home, depending on which federal or state dollars that's being pursued through. So we adapt our programs and rules over time. Ecosystems have networks, and so do governance systems. So there's, I don't know if people have heard of this. I think it's really fascinating, but trees talk to each other. They talk to each other through their networks that's below the ground. So they send signals. So if there's something that's happening at one end of a forest, the trees actually talk to each other and say, hey, heads up, this is something that's coming down the pipeline and you might experience it soon too. They can also exchange sugar and carbon through their root systems. So they're also exchanging really resources as well as information. Our systems, our governance systems and structures and networks and, you know, whatever level that you would like to call it, the relationships that we have with one another, which this graphic is from the September 23rd discussion that Dr. Douthit had put together. We're also doing similar things, right? We're talking about, hey, I have these best practices or these principles that might be helpful for you, or I have this resource that I would like to share with you. So we're really also exchanging resources and information across our own networks in ways that are useful to us as well. And I think one last thing that's a similarity between governance systems and ecosystems is that a lot of the features are replicated through similar processes. So we see this in deltas where essentially the way that they're created is there's deposition that happens over time, and then the river switches and fills in the next available vacant space. Another way to think about this is when a tree grows, there's a branch that grows out of the ground, and then it grows another branch and another branch and another branch and another branch. And that's how it grows. That's a very simplified way of explaining it, but they display self-similarity across multiple scales, right? And our governance systems kind of do this too. So whether it's at the federal, state, regional, parish, or municipal level, there are going to be a lot of things that are similar about those systems and structures because they have to talk to one another. There's also going to be some things that aren't similar, right? Like there might be some very specific differences between these as well. And so, of course, governance systems are not ecosystems. There are a lot of things that we don't find in ecosystems that are necessary to being a part of governance systems, right? So in ecosystems, they don't have jurisdictional boundaries. You know, although we have tried to write in some of our jurisdictional boundaries to follow some of those natural boundaries, or at least try to. We'll talk about that in just a moment. You know, our governance systems don't have rules. Not all of our rules are governed by mathematical equations that exist in nature, right? There's some specific principles that are relevant to the natural world that are not leveraged into the way that we think about rules and the decisions that we're making. We're not using like those very robust equations. Nature doesn't have money, so resources in nature are exchanged through energy, not dollars and cents. And then I want to hit in again, because this is really meant to ground another concept in saying, you know, as we think about the watershed initiative, and one of the things is to really get back to what is natural floodplain functions, how are we really thinking and incorporating natural systems back into our principles, as well as our practices, as well as our projects, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to keep going back to what are the things that are within nature that we can also replicate through these processes, that we can also learn from. So we'll also be thinking about lifting this idea into scales of planning, implementation, perhaps projects. But we kind of wanted to start here and ground the discussion. And I don't know if Kim or Tom, if y'all have anything to add here. And I don't know if our regional steering committee members have any types of questions or comments or feedback. Okay. Well, here we are, just solving the world's challenges, one concept at a time, I guess. That's the thing about Zoom, is sometimes not everybody's off mute, so I can't tell if people think my jokes are funny or if I'm just laughing at myself. Thanks for the peer support.
Yeah, just go ahead with that. We're all muted, okay?
There we go. We can stick with that, I think. Yeah, I got a thumbs up from Tom. Okay, there we go. Got some water. Okay, so we're going to shift gears again. So once again, all of these concepts are related. Think of them as building blocks that will be used over time, either in today's discussion or future discussions. And they might even have related to past discussions too, right? So, you know, our regional steering committee members took a survey that asked them about planning and implementation scales. And we'll get to that for those of you who, haven't seen the survey. We'll explain kind of what that was about and what the questions were, that were asked as well. So whenever we think about scales in decision-making and planning, there's not just one scale. You know, you can think about geography. Some people think about time. Some people think about the scale of implementation. Some people think about the scale of planning, right? Because a lot of these things aren't necessarily, they're layers. They're layers that are considered for decision making. It's not, we're just going to consider time in our decision. We try to really think about all those components put together. So when we're talking about, we mentioned this earlier, right? We have in the past tried to draw some of our jurisdictional boundaries to be the same as some of our natural boundaries. So Louisiana actually has a lot of really great examples of this. Other states do this too. But you'll see that there's a dashed line here, and that is actually the boundary between Mississippi and Louisiana. And then you'll see the blue line, and the blue line is the Mississippi River. So you can see that we have really tried to make our jurisdictional boundaries from a state perspective, and we see this at the parish level in Louisiana too, be that natural boundary. So sometimes they are the same. Sometimes we try to make them the same, and sometimes nature does what nature does and finds a different, literally the river finds a different route, and the jurisdictional boundary that we had drawn is no longer the same as that water boundary. So we'll go over just a couple of examples here in box number 1, which is green, and box number 2, which is gray. Let's go ahead and pull up box number 1. So you'll see, once again, the dashed line is the Louisiana-Mississippi line. And then the blue line is the Mississippi River. And then you'll see what is called, they call these oxbows. So essentially, the river has switched over time and has abandoned the curve in the river because it wasn't as efficient. It found a better way to go, to be basically the steeper, faster, quickest route to its outlet. So you'll see that, you know, we had initially tried to draw that boundary to be consistent with the initial curve of the river, and then that changed over time, because that's what nature does, is it changes over time. That doesn't mean that we went back in and redrew the jurisdictional boundary though, right? Because I think that would probably be a lot more difficult to do. A lot easier for nature to change things at times than it is for us to change things in our jurisdictional boundaries. So another example that we see of this is further downstream from this point number 1 that we were looking at. We also have our parishes that are like this. So Point P is on the western side of the Mississippi. West Feliciana actually crosses over the Mississippi River and shares some of these boundaries. Other examples are East Baton Rouge and West Baton Rouge, for example, as well. So we have tried to make our jurisdictional boundaries be the same as our natural boundaries to rivers as well. So beyond just jurisdictional boundaries, timescale also matters. So we have changing risk over time because our risk is dynamic, just like our communities are dynamic, our communities are dynamic, but our environment is also dynamic, which means that that risk changes over time because the conditions are changing over time. So what you're seeing here in this map in the lower right-hand corner, it's actually flicking through a couple of things. So the first one that's going to come up here in just a second shows you the special flood hazard areas. So that's our risk for today, and it'll come back through. But you'll see that there's these time steps and these increments from 2027 to 2042, which is the map that we see here, to 2067. And this is projected flood risk for a 1% or 100-year storm surge event projected out to those time steps. And that's with full implementation of a document that we call the Coastal Master Plan. So if every single project that's mentioned in the 2017 version of that plan was actually funded and constructed, that would be our flood risk. So the darker the blue, the deeper the water. You'll see over time that land loss is shown on this map, so the land goes away. So you notice that there is some encroachment into our region. Flood risk, in particular around the coast, is getting higher. What these maps do not show is riverine flood risk. Right, it's only that very first time step that shows a special flood hazard area as it overlaps with our coastal flood risk as well on this map right here. So thinking across the next 10 years, 25 years, into 50 years, how are we also thinking about how this particular information that we have, which is a projection that's provided by Coastal and Protection and Restoration Authority through the Coastal Master Plan and their modeling efforts, how are we thinking about this information as it relates back to Region 7 of the Watershed Initiative? And I do want to say that this is sourced from OCD. So this map in particular was made by them for this effort. And then these were actually altered CPRA and USGS data and information by OCD for the LA Safe efforts. And then something to think about here too is that we do list, Gen X, what age they are as these time steps roll on. So it's really thinking about yourself, perhaps as your kids get older, and then grandkids, and so on and so forth. So thinking about our risk being dynamic over time. And then also knowing that as there are places that are, we have particularly high flood risk, those individuals might make decisions to move other places. And I think that we've seen since Laura in particular that there's been an influx of people to other areas. And I think Baton Rouge is one of those areas where people actually said, okay, well, I'm going to stay over here for a while, and I might go back to Lake Charles or the surrounding area, or I might not, I might stay. So it's just something to incorporate as well. And so I think something else that we wanted to bring up as a grounding concept with this group in particular is the conversation around what a HUC is. So HUC, H-U-C, is a hydrologic unit code. So it's really a numbering system for watersheds. When you were younger and you went to the library, they don't have this anymore, but they had to do a decimal system, and that was kind of how you looked up your books, right? This system is a numbering system that's somewhat similar. So each of those different hydrologic unit codes is a series of numbers. So it's either a series of 12 numbers, which is the smallest scale, or 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. And so those are all nested within one another. So you'll think like these are your smallest rivers. Like this is the river that you go out to sometimes that's just down the street from you that might have a very small bridge over it. It's a very local place that has very, very, it's not large infrastructure that's passing over it usually. Then you have your HUC 10, which is a step out. So you can think of HUC 12 as being like your city or town size, perhaps smaller. HUC 10 is a little bit bigger than that. HUC 8 can really be composed of multiple parishes, and you'll see the HUC 8 scale and how that nests into a 6 and a 2 and 4 in these other graphics here. And then nested, the HUC 8 is nested within the HUC 6, so it gets a little bigger. So your 6 is really regional across the state, so statewide regional. Your HUC 4 is then a little bit bigger than that. And your HUC 2, which is shown in this, is really talking interstate. So what this is this is a USGS method to be able to normalize the scale and to catalog different basins or catchments within the United States. So for example, it's a lot easier to say, you know, in reference to HUC number, rattle off 8 numbers. These are the different actions that we want to take. These are the types of data or information that relate back to it. So it's a lot easier to reference that code than it is to say, oh, it's this system where it's east of the Natal Beni, but west of the state line, and it's bound by these north and south locations as well. So it's just an easier way to identify what it is. But really what it is just a nesting of all of those within one another, and as a way of numbering our watersheds. So I am going to have Dr. Douthit also assist in leading this part of the discussion. I'm going to provide a really quick overview of what this is. So I'm also going to drop in the chat box, if you will hold please, a link to the meeting packet, which has this particular, let me see here. Oops. So this meeting packet, which I just put the link in the chat pod, actually has this graphic blown up so you can see it. So if we move on from this graphic, you can continue to look at it. It also has the maps for the HUC boundaries, as well as those different flood risk maps that we just described. If you're having trouble accessing this, you can also go to our website at crpcla.org, click on the Region 7 Watershed tab, and then you'll find a drop-down that says Upcoming Events. Click on that, and then click on the meeting packet, and it will give you the exact same link. So what this graphic is showing here, it is not an exact representation. It's meant to be a visual exercise that shows us that whenever we have our existing organizations or entities that are related to doing watershed work, and this is also not comprehensive. I also want to say that as well, that they're considering really those different HUC scales, and then they're also considering what is the jurisdictional scale that exists. Like at what level do management decisions need to be made? So I think some examples of this are, this is not an organization, but our watershed models. Those are going to be made through multiple contracts at the state level. The state has essentially split modeling regions up. Region 7's modeling region matches our Region 7 provisional boundaries. But what they're going to do is look at the HUC 8 level within our watershed. So we have multiple HUC 8s. They're going to essentially have each of those HUC 8s talk to one another through our regional model. And then our regional model is going to talk to the other regional models that are being developed across the state. So while that primary planning scale is the HUC 8, it's something that's being really implemented at the state level. In your meeting packet, you'll also see the explainers for each of these acronyms. So LWI is the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. CPRA is the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. PDDs are Planning and Development Districts. So some examples of those are Capital Region Planning Commission, South Central Planning and Development Commission, Acadiana Planning Commission, New Orleans Regional Planning Commission as well. Those are just a couple of examples. S and WCD, those are Soil and Water Conservation Districts. ARBC is the Amite River Basin Commission. And then there are a couple of other, let me see, SLUFPA, South Louisiana Flood Protection agency. I think I might have actually just misspoke there, and I apologize. Please look at the meeting packet for SLSPA, SLSPA East. And I think those are most of the acronyms that are listed on here. Okay, great.
Part of the reason I think
So
that,
once again, go ahead.
so I think one of the reasons why we're putting this together, and we note that this is conceptual, is just to think about the fact that the way that the catchments and the basins operate flows across jurisdictional lines. Now, probably for if we had a completely rational, full engineering approach, right, we could scale up exactly all of our planning just at the basin scale. And in some cases, we have, for example, the Amite River Basin Commission, which is organized at the Huck 8 scale, which is where we've had a lot of our sort of coastal river flooding, as I'm sure all of you will know. But there are other questions of implementation regarding development regulations, decisions about coordinating funding that happen at jurisdictional levels. And so that implementation, right? So it might be a parish level decision about freeboard, for example, just to make a hypothetical idea. And that might affect multiple Huck 8 watersheds. And the management of a Huck 8 watershed might involve the incorporation of multiple parishes. And so here we just wanted to think about, in terms of thinking about how you want to organize regionally, thinking about some of those trade-offs of organizing at different purely watershed or sort of ecological scales, but also thinking about how that interplays with existing regional government and how those interact. So for example, watershed models that they're developed at Huck 8s or regionally, do you want to have many of those being operated without the region, or do you want to have a single sort of body doing that, maybe that operates at a Huck 6 or Huck 4 level, but then manages models for planning at different levels? So to think about, as you consider what your vision for this watershed coalition is moving forward, that there's an interplay between sort of the engineering geography or the ecological geography at the watershed level, and then the many complex government geographies that we have.
There you go. Had to unmute. Thanks, Tom. You have such a concise way of explaining really what we're thinking in terms of these conversations. So I think that question, what is the vision of the interplay between engineering and ecological geographies as well as those jurisdictional geographies? Because we do, it's really a both and in that case. It's not an either or. And so how are we really thinking within that vision? Like what is the appropriate approach or set of approaches that we think that we need to take as a coalition? And so I am wondering if any of our regional steering committee members have any initial thoughts as to thoughts or any responses to this graphic, or thinking about really the interplay between those engineering or ecological scales compared to the jurisdictional scales.
Our parishes along the North Shore.
Oh, can you say that one more time, Chuck?
I was, prompting any of our parishes along the North Shore. They got some, what are their thoughts on this?
Hi, this is Bridget. I would venture to say that I agree that I think the geological boundaries really should help us govern or figure out how best to govern any regulatory aspects. Because if we're looking at it from a jurisdictional standpoint, if we're not all on the same page and we all have different standards, but basically our geographical boundaries, that our standards will affect our neighbors. And if we all have different thresholds, I think that we won't ever be able to have some consistent or concise protection if the measuring stick varies, but the watershed itself is affected by different jurisdictions.
Yeah,
Hey,
thanks,
this is
Bridget.
Everything stops.
Can I go ahead?
Go ahead, Earl. Yeah,
The only
please.
thing I'm going to say is that, you know, me being towards the end of my career here and looking back, I can tell you that in all the efforts we've done towards this end, the one common denominator is that no group has ever been willing to give up any power within its own jurisdiction. I completely get, you know, that the effectiveness of you know, watershed wide regulations would be, you know, multiplied if indeed we could all agree on that. But I just don't know that we should assume that any jurisdiction would be willing to give up any of its authority. You know, and we just need to keep that in mind as we're talking about this.
Yeah, that's a really good grounding point. Really, really good grounding point, Earl.
I actually agree with Earl. Really, I do, because the oversight, or actually the enforcement side of anything that would be regulatory, is going to fall to those areas or the jurisdiction that has the burden and the responsibility to uphold it. I just think that maybe from a regional or watershed standpoint, there should maybe be some sort of best practices or recommended standards for adoption, not necessarily dictating that it has to be adopted, just so we at least have that as leverage to bring to our policymakers to say, if we're collaborating with our neighbors to the east and to the west, or to the north and to the south, this is what they're collectively doing. It's beneficial to all of us. So I think it just gives us more tools, if you will, in our toolbox to use that if it would be something that could be embraced, or more or less, I guess you can say, blessed by the regional group.
Yeah, and I guess one of the questions would be in terms of members considering, should those standards be made region-wide, considering kind of common denominators among the different HUC-8s or within the different ones, or, you know, or would it be tractable to have different strategies per watershed? And so if you think it would be harder to have per watershed decisions in that realm, that, you know, that's kind of how you might think about the interaction of the jurisdictional and the geological boundaries in terms of the design of your eventual organization.
I agree that this is Earl again. I absolutely agree that you know, the regional approach to best management practices or something like that's the right thing to do. And you know, I just wanted to point out that, you know, people who have power don't tend to give it up very often. As for the question of whether or not it should be across all the HUC-8s or per watershed, I would suggest that, you know, local officials seem to be much more responsive to recommendations made for their area rather than general recommendations based on something Louisiana wide or Southeast Louisiana wide even. Just, you know, just saying, I think officials are more responsive to something that actually looks at their particular situation.
This is Chuck. I tend to think that all, you know, when you're talking about scales of planning and implementation, I think all scales will be involved in both. As I was going through the survey, I found that, you know, my responses weren't varying much. I think my feeling is that maybe on the planning side, it will be more towards the larger scale, and on the implementation, it may be more towards the local scale. But all scales will be involved in the decisions. It'll just be a little weighted more one way or the other.
Yeah.
And
Thanks, Chuck.
Maybe that, you know, the planning, you know, at the larger scale, that's what sets those boundaries and constraints and recommendations and standards that people are talking about, and guidance.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm trying to record this as we go. So if you see that I'm typing something up here that is not reflective of the comment, please let me know. I do
Rachel,
want to
think
say we do
Mr.
have a
Forms
comment.
also made a comment he said that I'd add that even though you may, this is not my words, even though you may be in different watersheds such as Amite, Tangipahoa, Tickfaw, and Natalvin, et cetera, the development codes may affect each other in terms of where developers decide to develop. And so
to
think about the interaction of watershed planning with other policy decisions and how those are made throughout the region, you know, in terms of housing and real estate markets, which tend to operate regionally, transportation networks, which are modeled regionally at the metropolitan area scale.
It sounds like that is related to something I heard brought up early in this process, and I'm talking about the watershed initiative process, not the regional planning commission. But that you want balance as far as regulatory codes, because if one area has very restrictive codes and one area doesn't, then the development's going to occur in the area that doesn't. So you want to be fair.
Yes, if one side of the river can do things this way and then the other side of the river can do things another way, there's going to be an economical advantage on one side or the other, and we need to eliminate that.
So if you have recommendations that are based on the hydrology and the response of the river, that should apply to both sides.
Oh, this is May. I agree with what you all are saying, but I would hope that after we go through this exercise and this process, that we would rely on the data and let the data drive the decision. And then, but I think it was Chuck talking about the power and them giving up the power and all that. Yeah, but we just gonna have to bite the bullet.
Well, also don't forget, some of us are split into 3 regions, so we're going to likely get 3 different sets of recommendations.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Earl. Thank you for bringing that up. Let me see, we do have just a couple more minutes on this particular section before we move on. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
I have a question more than a thought. I was wondering, specifically related to this data-driven decision-making. Regarding that, I know that LSU is doing like an analysis of what regulatory, things are in place in certain, parishes or municipalities, if you will, or even across, parish lines. But I'm wondering, is there going to be a breakdown to show those areas that have more protective factors or more regulatory insight or oversight had less flood, repetitive loss flooding, or registered number of policy holders that had to have claims, something that would maybe show or prove that those areas that did have stronger regulatory oversight and protective factors in their regulations already in place have over the years shown less repetitive loss and shown less flood insurance claims.
Yeah, I mean, definitely what we're gonna compile and be able to map is sort of the regional landscape of certain residential only subdivision requirements around questions like detention, no impact, no adverse impact standards, elevation. And certainly those could be associated with some of those outcomes, but we're going to be very cautious about trying to attribute causality with any of that data, because there's so many other things that have to be considered in a model like that, in terms of natural fundamental flood risk in the area, different population demographic changes, and we only have a cross-sectional data set. So I think hopefully it'll let us know in sort of inventory and survey what's going to be what exists in the region, and then certainly we can look at that and compare that to best practices. But I don't want anybody to think that we can sort of make that association or conclusion. I think we're going to be very cautious if we do that at all.
Hey, this is
Bridget,
Earl. You also have to look
go
at
ahead,
it.
Earl.
Go ahead.
I'll put it in the chat. I was just going to say, Bridget, to your question, FEMA has done studies that may be similar to what you're asking about. Maybe I can just put that in the chat as a reference for later.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Evelyn. And I do want to acknowledge a comment from Dietmar in the chat. HUCs are primarily useful for organizing riverine flood risk, especially major rivers at HUC 8 or 10 scale. But a very significant portion of flood risk is flash flooding, which HUC organization does not address. Also, HUC organization is not that useful for surge risk.
I was also going to mention that, you're going to have to look at regulation over time too, because at least our developers would argue that our development regulations are onerous and getting more so. But, that's also been in reaction to floods we've had. And, if you look at really strict regulations, it might be in reaction to floods from 10, 20 years back. And that's why. So you would have to look at post regulation development as opposed to pre. So it gets complicated.
That's correct. Yeah. So we have a cross-sectional data set that we're making. And so it's not going to have causal. I don't think we can do that. Eventually, if there's ever interest in the region to a long-term historical retrospective in that, I'm sure I and many other researchers would be interested in participating in that. But I think that that's a big undertaking.
Likely doing.
This is Bridget again. I appreciate the feedback, absolutely. And that was more or less what I was alluding to, is what Evelyn mentioned earlier. Is I know that FEMA does have some of this longevity aspect, best practices, and where impact has been minimized because regulatory aspects were put into place prior to some flooding. So you could see the pre and post from that standpoint. So I wasn't sure if we would have some of the same data for extrapolation, just to see if there were certain communities that, say 2016 flood, they had some parameters in place prior to that because of maybe a prior historical flood in their neighborhood, their region. And after putting those things in place, you could see that their claims were less than a neighboring community or another community in the same state. Because a lot of times my community want to know what's happening with our neighbors or other places around Louisiana, because they recognize that the topography and the community and sometimes the culture and embracing these changes are going to be similar, rather than plucking something out of Ohio or Alabama or what have you. That was the reason for that question.
For sure.
That kind of ties into
Thank
something
you.
I was going to say, is that caution into, waiting to on the data to put in certain policies into play, because if we're talking about the modeling data, those going to be roughly 2 years or more before they're ready, and they're just going to be a base model and not intended to simulate certain scenarios. And then with the USGS gauges that we're working on, we're going to add about 100 gauges. That's going to be probably 2 years before you have usable data that, you can draw correlations from. In some cases, we might get 6 months down the line and say that gauge wasn't at a good location. We need to move it. But looking at areas that are similar to us and that have gone through some of this, Houston, for example, North Carolina, not geographically similar to us, but they've done some of this type of work. And we've, the Watershed Initiative has talked with them, but they might have, particularly in Houston, some good ideas. And I think in North Carolina too, that good ideas that would apply to all.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And then one quick thing, we do have a comment in the chat box from Pat Forbes. Approaches to managing local flash flood risk can have an impact on riverine flooding too. And we've added this in the previous slide here. And then, I think a question that comes up in a lot of different spaces, related and unrelated to Region 7 in particular, but I think there's this question about what do statewide development codes look like? I know that, there's going to be some changes with regards to the CRS program, and communities have to adopt a 1 foot freeboard if they want to, I think it's be higher than a rating of 8. I don't remember if it's 8 or 9. If somebody remembers that directly, please correct me. But, is that something that would be useful to this group? Is that something that we might look to the state to say, yeah, we should maybe have a statewide development code relative to freeboard or fill? Or is that just something that's like, nah, that needs to be done at the regional or at the parish or municipal level?
The CRS change is going to affect community CRS ratings 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Thank you.
If you're below 4, you're already doing it, and if you're not required to have it, it's a prerequisite to be 8 or lower. So that's kind of the way that works. I think the only way a statewide code would actually help is the fact that a lot of us are going to have to be selling the freeboard that we need to adopt to our local governing authority. And if there was maybe a statewide saying we had to, since we have to, it might be easier to sell. That might be the only thing that I can see that it would benefit. It's going to have to be essentially adopted locally, because it's got to be adopted by the jurisdiction that is enforcing the whatever flood map that they're enforcing.
Thanks, Earl.
When you talk about freeboard, what do you mean exactly there?
There's a new CRS requirement requiring at least, if you're going to be CRS 8 or below, you have to adopt 1 foot of freeboard, meaning whatever your base flood elevation is, plus 1 foot for your building requirement.
Thanks for clarifying that, Earl. I think we have time for maybe one more comment on this, and then we'll have to switch gears.
If
Anybody
I
have
may,
anything else to add?
Rachel, if I may, I think one of the things that's important for all of us to realize is that elected officials don't have any official training on the topics concerning floods, about flood insurance, about CRS ratings. And unless you go out on your own, like we did after our flood of 16, to try and get whatever training that we could, then most elected officials just don't know. And that's part of the problem. I think we need to try and educate as many of our newly elected, and maybe some of the older folks that have been around for a little while and haven't had exposure to it, so that they understand what CRS means and what freeboard means. I know these are things that we've been working on. We just were elevated from a 9 to an 8 for our CRS, and now we were actively working on trying to go to our 7. But most, as I have experienced in talking to a lot of mayors, they don't even know what it is. So I think everybody needs to understand that elected officials don't speak your language. They don't know what you're talking about when you talk about HUC 8s or HUC 10s or freeboard. All this terminology is Greek to most of us. So let's just put that in the back of your mind that we need to educate some of our local officials as well. That's all. Thank you.
Earl, I'll second that. In fact, I'll even go as far. We had this discussion yesterday in a Region 6 subcommittee, is that we need to make sure that every municipality and every parish has access to a certified floodplain manager. I mean, it makes a huge difference, and makes a huge difference in your CRS score too.
Well, I will tell you, after the flood of 2016, I had one at the time, and he's still with me, and he is an exceptional individual, and he was the one that kept us out of all sorts of problems when we were trying to recover from the flood. Now I have 2 more additional floodplain managers because we felt like we needed to make sure we had all of our bases covered. And the third one that we trained is now going on to work for somebody else. So it doesn't take a whole lot of, there's not a lot of cost involved. It's just a matter of a commitment to make sure that you have the best qualified folks that you can to do the job that needs to be done at the municipal level.
Yeah. Thank y'all so much. And one last comment on this that I want to add before we switch gears is from Bobby McGinnis. Mississippi river gauges should also be upgraded to help your modeling. Also, men in Louisiana floods originate in watersheds that begin in our state. We are really familiar that a lot of our HUC boundaries are shared with Mississippi. We share a lot of our water with y'all, as well as a lot of other things. Some of the fun stuff too, like some of our cultural aspects that we have. So we are going to shift gears, y'all. This conversation is going to continue. We're just switching gears really quick. I'm going to drop in the chat box the link to the survey results. So if you click on that link, you can download the survey results from the survey that the Regional Steering Committee members were asked to take. So very quickly, for those of you who took it, first of all, thank you. For those of you who are unable to, that's okay. We're continuing the discussion today. And then also we want to provide an explanation of what that survey was. So there were 5 categories. So the category, here's an example, is listed in bold. So informed decision making. This is a potential solution that was identified from previous conversations with the Regional Steering Committee members. Each of these categories had subcategories, which you see in this non-bold text here. And so those are potential actions that were linked with those potential solutions. So we asked each of the Regional Steering Committee members to fill this survey out and to say at what planning scale, so HUC 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Remember, HUC 2 is the really big one, that's interstate. HUC 12 is perhaps really like city size. Maybe not necessarily matching with the jurisdictional boundaries, but if you think in terms of geographic size. And then the implementation scale from municipality to parish, region, state, federal, and unsure. We also gave an option for people to say if there was an organization that they thought could implement those items that were listed. And if they thought so, could they please describe it? And if they thought that there was maybe an organization that could implement these items with additional capacity and or changes to bylaws or statutes. So there were a lot of lessons that were learned from this survey. First of all, thank you to the steering committee members who took this survey. And I also want to apologize. I thought that the survey was going to take 20 minutes. The SurveyMonkey estimate said it would take 14. But I think something that I learned is that maybe I should add 10 or 15 minutes to the SurveyMonkey estimate. And also learned a couple more things along with that, but for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and move on. So this is not in the survey meeting packet or survey results packet that was sent, and that's also in the chat box. That's because we wanted to get those results out to everybody as soon as possible before the meeting. This is some post-processing. So across all 5 of those categories, so projects, accountability, capacity and capability, policy and planning, and informed decision-making, we basically looked to see what were the number of responses that were selected for each of these planning scales as well as implementation scales. So majority of folks really thought that for planning, when we're thinking about this, HUC 8 and HUC 10 perhaps makes the most sense. For implementation, it was at the region. The majority of responses said for the region. The different colored bars, by the way, match back to the squares that are in the bottom left-hand corner. So each of those different topics. So for example, gray is projects. And then following behind that, people said that there are things that should be implemented at the parish level, as well as at the state. So we're going to get into these details. I'm going to ask Kim Marasek and Tom to be able to help guide us through some of those conversations. And then Evelyn, please feel free to jump in at any point in time. So what we're going to do is walk through the survey results together. And we're going to really try to get concise with our regional steering committee members on what the organizational structure loosely needs to look like that supports regional efforts. We say loosely because please remember and keep in mind that we're not going to make the decision on the provisional recommendation until the end of January. So these conversations are going to continue. We're going to continue to adapt based on what y'all are saying and what the needs are. We also want to consider how we can support parish and state efforts and vice versa. And then a fun analogy, y'all, as we think about this work, as we think about building this coalition, as we think about that long-term vision of the interplay between our engineering and ecological geographies, as well as our implementation or jurisdictional geographies, we're making a gumbo, right? There isn't one organization that has all of the things that are necessary across all the different scales. Somebody might bring the pot, right? They might say, this is my big gumbo pot. I'm going to bring it. Somebody's going to bring a roux. Somebody's going to bring some veggies. Somebody's going to bring some meat. And it might not taste that great at first, right? It's going to stew for a long time, and hopefully we got some fall weather here, right, that we get to enjoy and be in community with one another, and it'll get better over time. So I just wanted to offer that analogy for us as well as we're thinking about this. So we're going to transition to talking about these survey results. So let's see, quick explainer for what we're looking at here. So what you're seeing is the same thing that's in the survey result packet. I wish I could, there we go. So let's focus in on this light blue color. That light blue is HUC 8. So the bigger the bar is, the more times that people mentioned it. We had 10 respondents out of our 17 regional steering committee members. So please also keep that in mind. So the green is HUC 2, that's the biggest interstate level. Yellow is HUC 6. This dark blue, which isn't represented on this particular chart, is HUC 4. HUC 10 is orange, HUC 12 is purple. And then anytime you see pink, that's unsure. So this is for the planning scale. And then for implementation, green is municipality, blue is parish, yellow is region, light blue is state, orange is federal, and purple is unsure. So for this particular question, we're thinking about what is the planning and implementation scales related to informed decision-making that y'all think make the most sense to take place at the regional level. Most people said HUC 8, HUC 8 and HUC 10, which isn't surprising based on what we know from the cumulative results, right? That's really where we need to think about our informed decision-making. And then who's that implemented by? Region came up for a few of these, so regional model development, for example, as well as some said the parish. Are there any initial reactions or responses to this? Or Kim or Tom, do you have anything to add?
I just think that, these are questions hopefully people will think about different possible configurations, some of the ramifications, and there are trade-offs. For example, well, all of the HUC 8s, I think there are eight of them in the region, have the same demands on them for modeling long-term. Would you want 8 different bodies to manage those, or would people think it's the efficiencies, or it'd be too complicated to have one group or organization? And so I think it's a question of, again, matching the, where the action scales are going to be, from different hazard issues to, the scales that you guys think organizing yourselves around are most efficient.
Thanks, Tom, for continuing to ground us. We also asked people what organizations or entities they thought might be able to fulfill that role, either currently as they are constructed or as they exist, not constructed, or with a little bit of changes to bylaws or statutes. So we did have some people throw out a couple of ideas. So Amite River Basin Drainage and Water Conservation District is one of those. It says partner with Army Corps and the state DOTD specifically. Could be a combination of agencies, so DOTD, as well as the Watershed Initiative and USGS, the United States Geologic Survey. And then East Baton Rouge is also working on their own parish-wide model as a part of its drainage master plan. And I think something else that might be, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just thinking, I think one of the questions that come to my mind when I, look at this, the results of this are kind of related to the interplay between the HUC 8 and the HUC 10 scale. And so when I, looking at the maps, HUC 8s are multi-parish and HUC 10s are multiple HUCs inside a parish. And so thinking about how functionally that might work, and maybe this this question specifically to people who are developing models at the parish-wide level or working with the models that are being developed at the HUC 8 level. How are you envisioning those interrelating to each other?
Okay, well, we left the long pause. We'll give y'all a couple of minutes to think about that. Something that I also wanted to point out is when we talk about HUC 8s, these are HUC 8s. This is a map that's provided. It's actually online at ArcGIS, but they're watershed boundaries that are downloaded from USGS datasets. So many of our HUC 8s, these are how many that we have across Region 7. So quite a few. They also extend into Mississippi. These are also the same boundaries that are being used for the modeling efforts in our region as well. If we zoom out, and just as a reminder for those HUC sizes, a HUC 6 is a lot larger, but one HUC 6 does not encompass all of our region. Our region is made up of multiple HUC 6s. If we go out one more step to HUC 4s, maybe one more step than that. There we go. We're still within multiple HUC 4s. So our region is fairly large, but HUC 4 to HUC 6 is more consistent with what the regional size of the efforts across the state are. So you'll notice that some of these boundaries match up really well with some of the other regions across the state.
Yeah, and some of the challenges, right, is that maybe Tangipahoa would be into a HUC 6 and a HUC 4, right? I think that so a jurisdictional boundary might span some of those, and that's some of the complication. And maybe a question, a follow-up, and I know that some of the participants here are engaging in parish and municipal stormwater and hazard planning in the region. And, I think it'd be interesting to, if they have any perspective on, what scales they're planning and organizing around within their local activities, and how does the fact that water flows in and out potentially of their jurisdictions sort of affect their work now, and how might they see benefit or have concerns about incorporating a regional approach?
So, hi, this is Melissa Kennedy from HNTV, working on the Stormwater Master Plan for East Baton Rouge Parish. And we're actually drilling down into much smaller watershed levels of evaluation. I want to say HUC 12 maybe. So we're getting into a more granular level, but we're also being very mindful when we come up with projects and policies, that those will not have negative impacts either upstream or downstream. So we're constantly monitoring what's going on in the watershed initiative and clearly in this region to make sure that as we move forward, we're taking into consideration the how the region is proceeding, as well as some of the things the watershed initiative is coming up with. Does that kind of answer your question? At least for East Baton Rouge?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I guess the question is, you know, because water, for example, now some of this in the Baton Rouge example is included in because there's an Amite River Basin organization, but you know, there's water even at the Huck 10 level that comes on the Comite River from other parishes into Baton Rouge, and so I assume this problem exists. With every, I think I meant more broadly, you know, that sort of how do local areas deal with that issue now where there's not something necessarily, maybe Baton Rouge isn't the best example because I meet, but you know, if you didn't have an organizational structure outside of the jurisdiction, how would you deal with that in your municipal planning or your parish-wide planning? And is that a major gap?
So if I'm following correctly, in situations where you have a water body that's flowing into the jurisdictional area and then out of the jurisdictional area, you're kind of limited by those factors as to seemingly be limited into what you can affect, because there's certain constraints set up on the upstream part of the watershed that are beyond your control, and there's certain constraints set up on the downstream that are also beyond your control.
So, Tom, your question about who do you coordinate with in your jurisdiction when you plan things gets me thinking. I'm curious to know of the folks who answered this survey and those who are looking at it now and kind of have an answer in your head. When we think about the scale for planning, are we thinking about the scale at which you design a project that reduces flooding in a certain impact area, or are we thinking about the scale at which we, you know, agree together to take a certain approach more generally, like along policy lines, or where we agree together that, hey, I'm not going to flood my neighbor upstream or downstream? You see what I mean? Because I think that maybe that's part of what I'm seeing in this, is that maybe some people are thinking about, you design a project in a Huck 8, but it also matters to you what the other parishes are doing, even outside of that Huck 8, because what they're doing on a policy perspective may impact inside of your watershed region, even though that parish may not entirely be in it.
When I went through the survey, I took it as more of the latter. General agreement, these are the approaches we're going to take. These are the policies and the things that are important to us. Certainly when you get down to the details of designing a project, you know, it's going to get more into the weeds. It's going to get to that smaller scale. And it depends on, you know, what you're trying to solve, or what you're trying to, question you're trying to answer, as to how, you know, the resolution, or I guess how small a scale you're going to get to.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chuck, and thanks Evelyn and Tom for jumping in to ask some really, I think, insightful questions. And I also want to point out, y'all, this is one of the things why, you know, this work is challenging, and it's also it's exciting to do these types of thought exercises. If this was simple and easy and there's a straightforward answer, we would have figured this out a long time ago. So
I have one other
there's
question.
really a myriad of solutions. Go ahead.
Do you lose some capacity when you get down to planning in the smaller scales?
I think that's a really good point, Chuck, and one that I kind of had a question about when I looked at the responses, because instinctively I would have assumed that the planning scale would have been larger. That response would have been larger than at the HUC 10, which again, I'm, HUC 10, HUC 8, it looks like is kind of where, we're thinking about planning for development standards and code standards. And I guess, my question, I guess, comes back to, if we're thinking about this, I guess in light of what Earl said earlier, that, people want locally contextual recommendations, but at a certain scale, we want to try to think about this more broadly and kind of that economy of scale and coming up with our development regulations and concepts for policy. And so I guess, thinking through, I'm having a hard time understanding like how that might look from an application standpoint, if we're thinking about development codes or regulations at that HUC 10 scale. And just thinking about East Baton Rouge Parish, I think there's 3 or 4. I think there's 4 HUC 10s in EBR. So I guess that's just kind of one of the questions I've been kind of thinking about since I looked at the responses.
Again, as I took the survey, I kind of, saw a pattern of my answers, and it's not cut and dry. It's not one way or the other. But it seems like the planning to me was more of a state, regional, parish scale, whereas the implementation and project design was more of a parish, regional, state scale. And, to say this region is unique, that is true, but there are other areas of the state that have water bodies that act like ours, particularly, in that northwest part of the state, in that Mississippi River Delta, where it's just flat and the water doesn't flow. So they have, just because they're in a different area doesn't mean they're different from us. They have the same, the same physical laws apply.
I'm wondering from other people and who took the survey, if you noticed any patterns like Chuck was saying. So in particular for me, underneath related to policy and planning, potential solutions and actions for the development of best practices for ordinances and regulations, this to me strikes me as we're not really sure. It might be the HUC 4, it might be the HUC 6, it might be the 8, it's a 10, and somebody just said that they were unsure, right? We appreciate that honesty. There's quite a few of these that strike me as being unsure, but where we're more sure about. The thing that we're more sure about, there we go, is the implementation scale. So it's, it's region and parish for most of these things. So, like the enforcement of those development ordinances or regulations, 6 out of the 10 people said, yeah, that's a parish thing. So I'm wondering if anybody else has some striking patterns that they realized when they were taking this. And I think also the question here is, whenever we're thinking about building this coalition, what are the specific, what are the specific organizations and existing government entities and agencies that are a part of really like this nested effort to be able to make that gumbo, right? So like who needs to be there to also support these activities? I'm going to call on some folks because we haven't heard from some other people. If that's okay, you can also say pass. We can do pass with love. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, but maybe Ronnie or Ross or Ryan. All three of my R's must be alphabetical order. Or Devin.
John Clark.
Y'all have any thoughts? Hey, John.
Well, the Pontchartrain Conservancy already encompasses 16 parishes in Louisiana and I think 4 counties in Mississippi. That's sort of our
Thanks,
boundary.
Ronnie. That's good to know. And I think whenever it comes to, the 4 buckets that were in the survey, so informed decision making, policy and planning, capacity and capability, accountability, and projects, are there particular things that y'all, that's in your wheelhouse, if you will, at Pontchartrain Conservancy?
Can you repeat that, Rachel?
I was asking a follow-up question if Pontchartrain Conservancy had some of these things within their wheelhouse. So if that's related to accountability, so monitoring or established metrics, maintenance and flood risk resource page. I'm trying to go through some of these, y'all. Thanks for hanging in there, projects or things of that nature. So really also thinking, okay, if we think that some of these actions need to happen, the planning scale is a HUC 8 and 10 for quite a few of these, right? But if we're thinking about having that be implemented at the regional parish or parish level, in some cases state, what are the, who are the people that are coming to the table to help provide support for some of these things? And does that look like a network that is supported through this coalition? Does that look like a series of organizations that manage it? Does it, what does that look like to y'all?
I'd like to hear from Ronnie if he wants to share if they see kind of an economy of scale in planning among 16 parishes. I wonder how that contrasts with some of our working in the parish experiences, right?
Well, like I said, we're covering 16 parishes, and we just want to make sure that whenever we come out with a policy or something, that it's good for everybody. It's good for all 16 parishes. And like I was saying earlier, we don't want to create an economical advantage for one parish to reject a policy. That's why it's best to come from a regional standpoint, so that if a parish or a municipality or something rejects a certain policy, they don't get an economical advantage or incentive for rejecting that policy, and can get more development or something in their area as a result. So looking at it from the bigger picture is always the best policy, I think, so that we don't create incentives that to cause flooding.
Thanks, Ronnie. Let me see. We have we're about to wrap up this section in particular. Are there other comments on the survey results or the survey in general? I think, you know, related to policy and planning, a lot of people said that that implementation is in some cases at the regional level, in some cases more so at the parish level. So establishing consistent and clear decision-making processes that consider current and future flood risk and regional settlement patterns. 6 out of 10 people said regional, and 3 out of 10 said state. 1 individual said parish. The enforcement was mostly for parish. Development of best practices is really split between parish and regional. For those related to capacity and capability, I think there's a question where we're not really sure. We kind of need to perhaps do these things, providing outreach and establishing and managing partnerships across multiple HUC scales. But when it comes to establishing and managing partnerships and partnerships and related coordinating and or collaborative efforts, 9 out of 10 people said that needs to be done at a regional level. Just a couple of seeds to leave y'all with. We can send the survey link out to everybody. Afterwards, you already have this exact same thing. It's just through the PDF instead. We did also ask one additional question on the survey that says, as our flood risk increases and communities grow over time, does the scale at which we need to organize, plan, and implement change? So 8 out of 10 people said yes. 1 person said no, and somebody said unsure. So, this is really, and we know that as things change, that we also need to think about organizing and planning and implementing things a different way.
What about some of
Are
our
there any
folks
final thoughts on this?
Go
ahead.
Want to see if any of our folks on the west end of the regional area had any additional thoughts, maybe the West Feliciana, East Baton Rouge Parish, Ascension.
Okay. Well, and also please know, if you do have some thoughts, and it might have been easier for you to express or share some of those, you can always reach out to me via email, or you can also give me a call. So I will put that information in the chat pod. Let me see. And then my phone number is right there. Great. Okay, well, we are going to shift gears one more time, y'all. And we're going to start talking. We've spent a lot of time talking about geography, I think, today. But we would also like to talk with y'all about the provisional boundaries and hear a little bit from this group about essentially through a Zoom poll and then a discussion between regional steering committee members. What are your thoughts on the provisional Region 7 boundaries? So we'll have Evelyn put a poll up. So the question will be, do you think the provisional Region 7 boundaries should remain as they are currently drawn? You can see on the slide, and I'll make this big just for the sake of us right now. You can see those Region 7 or the provisional boundaries across the state. You can see Region 7, which encompasses 13 parishes. And you should have that Zoom poll on your screen now. So just select, do you think the provisional Region 7 boundaries should remain as they are currently drawn? Yes, no, unsure. And for those of you who are not a part of the, or for really anybody, if you want to put any more information in the chat pod, we would also be curious to know, do you think they should remain as they are currently drawn? And if there's any reasoning with that. And then also, if you need more information to be able to really think about that, then let us know that too. So please feel free to put that in the chat pod.
I just want to, I think Rachel, maybe you were about to say this, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I'm clarifying too. This is not like the final time we will talk about this. This is not a high stakes, discussion at this point. Isn't that right? You kind of want to build off of the snapshot that we're getting right now.
Yeah, that's right, Evelyn. And yeah, just to reiterate that, we have a lot of time between now to the end of January before we have to vote as a regional steering committee on the provisional recommendation. So please know that. Please know that this is a discussion that is ongoing over time. We're really just trying to see what are people's thoughts. So I think we'll give a few more minutes. I see we have 13 of 33 who have responded. So we got quite a few people who are saying unsure. If you're comfortable and want to, please in the chat pod say, let us know if there's more information that would be helpful for you to have. So a little bit of the background on these provisional boundaries and how they were drawn. They were drawn based on those HUC boundaries at various different levels. So whether that's HUC 6 or HUC 8 boundaries, I think are what most of these are encompassed as. And then there was some consideration about jurisdictional boundaries too. So, what parishes might need to also fit together for the purpose of encouraging regional collaboration. Evelyn, I'm not sure if you have any more details that you want to add to kind of how those were drawn or made up. We got about 14 of 34 people who have voted. So if we could get a couple more, that would be great.
Sure. We do have some materials on the website that explains kind of the deliberation and initial decision process on those boundaries. And so I can definitely add that in the chat, right? I mean, they're provisional, right? It's all in the name. And I think that, this is like an important conversation, like I said, that doesn't end today. And unsure is a totally valid response, that's part of what we're here to do. So I just added that note because I saw the answers trickling in kind of slowly, and I didn't want people to feel like, oh, my hands are tied if I answer this.
Yeah, that's right, Evelyn. Well, I think we're probably okay to end the polling, and then we'll share those results with you. So, Evelyn, if you can work a little bit of Zoom magic, thank you. And I think, yeah, we're sharing the results. Great. So, we have 5 people who have said yes, 4 people who have said no, and 5 people who have said unsure. So, what we might do here is do a round robin based on our regional steering committee members who are on the phone. And I think what we really want to hear from y'all, and you can also say, I want to pass on this current conversation, or you can come back to me, no pressure. But, do you think the Region 7 boundaries should remain as they're currently drawn? And is there any more information that would help you make that decision? And like Evelyn said, unsure is definitely an okay answer. It is always okay to not be sure, because what we're trying to do is a part of an imperfect process, right? We're really trying to work through this together. So I'm going to go through my list here. Person at the top of my list on my participant list is Chuck. So Chuck, do you have any particular thoughts that you want to add to this?
Well, thank you. The way I kind of approach this is, do we gain or lose anything significant by changing the boundaries? And if we don't gain anything significantly, don't change the boundaries. If we lose anything significant, don't change the boundaries.
Thanks, Chuck. I think that's a really good question for people to think about, and I think it's one that we're going to continue to revisit over time. So let me see, next on my list is Alex Sumrall. Do you have any particular thoughts on this? And as a reminder, everybody, you can say pass or come back to me. Let me see, I have Alex, let me see, we might have lost him, but I'm asking him to unmute just in case he's unmuted or muted. Okay, we'll come back to you, Alex, no worries. What about Bridget? Bridget's next on my list.
I sort of agree with Chuck, where I think we need to weigh our pros and cons. And I think too, looking at it from the provision of governing agencies or already existing groups, is there a reason to realign these things or not based off of how our region is already pre-designed? And again, it would go back to the making that list of the pros and cons. What do we gain or what do we lose, or what are some obstacles that would really be stumbling blocks for our region if we, number one, change those boundaries, or number two, kept them? I think we need to really use that as a measuring stick to figure out if there would be any kind of reorganization.
And another thing to consider too is that, you know, these regions need to be talking to one another. There needs to be some link. So they're not going to be operating 100% independently. There should be, there's some regions that are connected hydrologically, so they're going to need to talk to one another for sure. But there also may be some good ideas over in Region 4 that we want to know about in Region 7. So that type of information needs to be shared. So no matter what, there needs to be some communication.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget, and thanks, Chuck. I'm just taking some notes over here on my end, and I know that our note takers are also working as hard as they can to take those too. Let me see, Devin, do you have any thoughts?
No, not right now. I think that the regions definitely should be communicating to each other, especially since there are some parishes that are in multiple regions. Maybe that could be set up in the governance structure somehow. But I do think that's a good idea.
Great, thanks, Devin. Let me see, next on my list is Dietmar. Dietmar, do you have any thoughts? And if you're talking, Dietmar, you might be muted.
To put it on. Yeah, I would say that, yeah, the boundaries is fine, but you remember the comment that I made earlier about that appendage of Iberville? That is not included here, which is a good thing. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, we understand.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we understand. And
you see, what happens is that, yeah, this is correct. In other words, but what I saw when you look at these stakeholders, it expanded the region apparently, unless I'm misunderstanding the whole concept of stakeholder. The stakeholders are supposed to come between the boundaries of this Region 7. Those are the stakeholders for Region 7. But when you look at the list of the stakeholders, includes communities west of the Mississippi River and portions of parishes west of the Mississippi River. And then when you include the regional planning commissions in Lafayette and Houma, it expands the whole stakeholders to include the Atchafalaya Levy District, the Lafourche Levy District, away from District 7. And it doesn't make sense to me to have stakeholders from that area that are included in Region 7.
I can understand your point. I'm not looking at that slide, but maybe that's something we need to look at. But just to know that that's why some of the parishes are members of multiple regional steering committees, because they fall into two areas.
The second part is that we would like to, the Amite River Basin, we would like to be not separate necessarily, but be left intact. We were established by acts of the legislature since 1981. And we are about a third or a quarter of this Region 7. We would like to maintain our integrity in between this watershed, Region 7. All these other watersheds are going to evolve because you're going to have to go to the level of the watershed of the Chefonta, to the level of the Tangipahoa River watershed, et cetera, in order to really study them and analyze the impact of floods. So from that point of view, we are, from the water point of view, we are kind of independent from the other watersheds and vice versa, you see?
Yeah, thanks, Dietmar.
I think
sorry, did you want to go ahead, Chuck?
Yeah, view the Amite River Basin Commission as a valuable partner and resource in this, and you know, I think that you know, we want to be able to tie into those resources and, you know, in your experience as well. So I think we'll benefit by y'all remaining intact, you know, but that's something we've got to figure out in this organizational structure. How is all this going to work together? Because certainly I don't think the Amite River Basin Commission is the only type of organization like that in the state, and it's other regions will be dealing with that as well. And that's, again, another reason to communicate with other regions.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. That's certainly what we're trying to do here is weave together a network. It's not about you know, consolidating or things of that nature. I think it's weaving together and leveraging the resources that exist. So Earl, do you have any thoughts, or Gary?
Yeah, that would have read. Hey, this is Earl. Yeah, I guess, you know, St. Charles is such a small piece of this region that I guess we had to give a lot of thought to how these regions were split up early on. In fact, we were originally left out of 7, but it left a piece of our parish in none of them. So I guess my thoughts are, if we're going to make changes, we have to coordinate it with our neighboring watersheds so that, you know, let's say you decide St. Charles Parish doesn't have enough in there. Well, am I going to be picked up in the other region, even though I don't touch it hydraulically? You know, it's just not, you can't leave anybody out. So I kind of lean towards leaving it where it is, because it is picking up everybody, and it was supposed to have been decided on a somewhat logical hydrologic basis. So that's kind of where I am.
Thanks,
I think
Earl.
the
Much
one
appreciated.
The one thing I'd add to your, maybe to think about from your perspective, Earl, is if the level of effort to be engaged in this region and Region 6 and Region 8 is like, would it be easier from an administrative standpoint on the parish's end to only be in 2 versus be in 3 with months and the spillway just in this particular region? And
yeah,
you know, we certainly want to keep you in it. I don't want to.
No, we have had that discussion, and there are 3 of us involved. Actually, there are like 5 of us involved if you include everybody. I don't know. As of right now, you know, in the planning stage, we think it's worth the effort. As we get a little farther, maybe not. But right now, we think it is, and we're trying to stay on top of all 3.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Gary here.
Thanks.
Sure. Region A is spot on. So, I mean, that boundary is pretty much makes us hydrologically independent, I guess, up here in West Feliciana.
Thanks, Gary. Sorry, I'm still here. I'm just taking some notes in my notebook as we go, so I'm not forgetting anything as we go. So region is spot on. Okay. Let me see. What about Karen, Vito, or Kim Coates? If we can make the comments a little quicker so we can get through everybody, that would be great.
Rochelle, this is Karen with the Home Builders Association. I'm really just listening. I mean, my understanding is that we want, you know, a holistic approach. We want enforcement of the law. We want consistent accountability held for those regulation and policies that we put forth. So my understanding is with the science-based HNTB study, this, you know, I'm with the previous feedback is, you know, let's leave it as is unless there's a compelling case to change it, which I haven't heard yet.
Thanks, Karen. Let me see, Kim Coates or Ronnie next?
Hey, Rachel, I'm gonna say kind of go with everyone else and say the same thing. And kind of like Chuck, if there's no advantage or, you know, of doing it, or if there's disadvantages to doing it, I don't think it should be done. And if there's no compelling case to make the change, then I think we should be good.
And I think that as we grow along, if we run into a hardship case, we'll deal with it.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to remind us of, Ronnie, because we are gonna deal with things that are challenging over time, and we can't foresee some of those things. What about Ross or Ryan? Y'all got any thoughts?
I mean, I think I would be in agreement with Chuck, who kind of started it, and then Kim, who kind of just, you know, reiterated it. But I'm always open to listening and hearing new and different ideas and keeping an open mind.
Perfect. Thanks, Ross. And what about Ryan? You got any thoughts? Okay, we might have lost him. And then what about John Clark or Major? Okay, well, we might have lost them. And we're going to take this poll just one more time. So Evelyn, if you could relaunch that, and we just want to see, we're going to ask the same question and just see kind of what y'all's thoughts are, and then we'll, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Hey, this is John Clark. I'm here.
Hey, John. We were just curious if you had any thoughts on, you know, the provisional boundaries, or if there's additional information. Some people were you know, talking about, you know, there's good.
Everything I heard sounded good. You know,
Thanks,
although,
John.
you know, as far as Iberville Parish, we are in 3 regions, though. So,
yeah.
But that's it.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be an advantage to send out that previous survey again after people have had time to think about things and hear some different points of view?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can ask this question as many times as y'all would like.
I mean the planning and implementation survey.
Oh yeah, I mean, we can send that out again if y'all would like. There might be a couple of things that I might change about it just to make it a little easier, but we can send it out again as is if you think that would be the most helpful exercise.
Well, it wasn't 20-minute survey. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'd apologize for that one. I take ownership over that.
I was going through it
and I learned.
Wait, I'm seeing this pattern. I said, this can't be right. I started second guessing myself and rethinking everything.
No, I'm so sorry.
No, it's not you. It's me.
One comment I might make about the, you know, where the wisdom of the committee in the long term is going to be of crucial importance, regardless of the scale of the region that gets built is a point that I think we can see in that survey some already, and a point Dietmar made, which is the careful incorporation of municipal and parish authority and autonomy, and also the incorporation of existing organizations. And how is that going to be done in a way, as sort of a way to think about, you know, some of the decisions in your design that's going to be, you know, going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think that's a really good thing for us to keep in mind and to ground in. And that's really kind of what the next set of these conversations are going to be. You know, what is like you just said, Tom, the careful incorporation of existing authority and autonomy in existing organizations throughout this as well. I'm going to go ahead and end this polling, and we will share these results. So it does look like after some of these conversations, less people are unsure, which is really good. There's still some people who say maybe perhaps they should change. And then we had 10 out of the 14 responses say that they should remain the same. So we could talk about this at length, and y'all, but we are going to have to move on for the sake of time. And we're going to skip over the relationships discussion because we did not get to that today. We'll get to that next time. But we did want to go ahead and open up the public comment period. So if there's anybody who is with the public that wants to come off mute and make a comment in particular, or any of our regional steering committee members, now is the time. I do have a timer so that we can, you know, we don't want to limit the amount of time that you're speaking. We want to be conscious of being respectful of other people's time. So we'll have a timer just to say 2 minutes. So if you do have something you'd like to say, please come off of mute, or you can put it in the chat box. Okay. I don't have any comments today. Okay, well, as always, you can always contact me. I'm going to put my email address back in the chat box again. So if you do have follow-up things that you wanted to add, you can do so by providing that to me on my email address. With that, we will move into the closing of this meeting, which is perfect timing because it is 3:23. So we'll go ahead and go to the closeout. So just a reminder, we are following a process for this. The next time that we meet on October 29th from 1 to 3:30 p.m., we're going to be beginning to start having this conversation about, you know, relationships and resources as part of the government structure. So that question that was just brought up, how are you incorporating, you know, existing organizations and authorities and autonomies into this structure based on, you know, what it is that we really think that this regional body needs to do, and how those efforts can be mutually supportive. So we'll start those conversations in a couple of weeks. And we do want to say thank you to the regional steering committee members for the quick turnaround on the last few meetings. We realized that having all of our meetings at the end of the month set us up for a situation where we were meeting on like Thanksgiving and I think Christmas Eve. And so we kind of had to shift some of the meetings around to be able to accommodate those holidays that are coming up, as well as the other regions meetings that are happening. So as we just heard from John Clark, as well as Earl Mathern, they're both on multiple steering committees. So we're trying our best to make sure that they don't overlap. So next time, that's what we're going to be discussing, and that's all working up towards the goal of voting on a provisional governance recommendation for Region 7 on our January 28th meeting. So there's a couple of things within here. Everybody should have received the meeting minutes from the September 23rd meeting. So wanted to throw that over to Chuck and Ross to lead us through the adoption of those.
Yep, so if I could hear a motion to adopt the September 23rd meeting minutes. Chuck, did you make that motion?
This is Earl.
Got it.
Second by Earl. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I'd assume nobody's against, but everybody's muted, so that works out fine. So adopted as the motion calls for.
Perfect. Thank y'all. We have that recorded. And our next meeting is October 29th from 1 to 3:30. We have some spooky icons here because it's really close to Halloween. And I know that we have some people on our steering committee who really love Halloween.
Yeah,
I'm not on the steering committee. I help coordinate it.
I might have a surprise, but I might show up with something different for that meeting. But before we go, I just wanted to thank everybody again for sticking around with us for 2.5 hours, and want to leave everybody with a couple of quotes. This first one I think is very applicable to what we're doing, but it's actually applicable to all things in life. And that is, success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. It's don't care what you're trying to achieve. If you're making steps towards that goal, then you're success. And that is by Earl Nightingale. And then I like this one too. The fairest thing in nature, a flower, still has its roots in earth and manure. And that's by D.H. Lawrence.
Thanks, Chuck. I really, really love those. And they definitely bring a smile to my face. Especially the one about the flower. That's very cute. Ross, did you have any words that you wanted to say?
Is that just a setup for me to say that you, Evelyn, and Kim do a great job, supporting and, driving this RSC? So if that was the setup, then yeah, I have something to say. Y'all do a great job and I appreciate it. I know Chuck does as well. So
yeah, they keep us on task.
Thank y'all. It wasn't supposed to be that kind of a softball, but.
Rachel, do you have anything before we end it?
The last thing I was just going to say is just thank y'all again for spending your time with us. We know that you have a lot of other things that you could be doing, and you chose to spend your time here with us, virtually at least. And I just wanted to throw up, what is now our vision statement, as for us to think about and reflect on and to close out with. So that's all that I had.
I want to thank everybody for the input today too.
Absolutely. All right, with that, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
I second it. I'll start it. I motion.
I second.
Chuck, second by Devin. I'll assume everyone's in favor since people are on mute, and I'll say it's unanimous to adjourn.
Perfect. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye, y'all.